Privyet, comrades, and welcome to another patriotic episode of History of the Marvel Universe. This channel is sponsored in part by Patreon supporters. If you would like to vote in monthly polls that help decide what topics get covered on the channel, then you can sign up for an amount of your choosing over at patreon.com/MaryMarvelite. The link is in the description below, along with other places you can find me. This week's tale begins several decades before the Marvel Age in the Russian capital of Moscow. During much of the reign of the Soviet Union, the KGB spent years covertly tracking down and executing mutant children before their powers could fully develop. Eventually, however, a professor named Pyotr Phobos made the case that, if trained properly from a young age, these mutants could grow up to become invaluable assets for the state. With rumors of similarly gifted youngsters appearing in other nations, Phobos gained support from certain factions within the Russian government to establish a state-sanctioned super soldier school. The first known student to be admitted to this academy was a boy named Mikhail Ursus, whose mutant ability allowed him to transform into a full-grown brown bear while maintaining his human intellect and capacity for speech. This also made him one of the first mutants born in the Soviet Union to be spared from a government-mandated euthanization. Meanwhile, in Belarus, a nuclear physicist named Sergei Krylov and his pregnant wife, Maria, were both irradiated in a laboratory accident. Maria subsequently died while giving birth, and their twin children were taken by the KGB, who fooled Krylov into believing that they had both perished as well. Brought to the super soldier school, these twins were raised alongside the older Mikhail Ursus, but were given separate identities to hide their familial connection and to obfuscate their origins. The girl was named Lenia Petrovna, and during adolescence she developed the mutant power to summon and manipulate energy from the Dark Force dimension. Her brother, meanwhile, was named Nikolai Krylenko and had the ability to generate force fields around his body that could reflect both kinetic and electromagnetic energy. In addition to this core class, Professor Phobos also had other students and oversaw other projects, including one at a remote facility in Siberia where three brothers, Isa, Ilya, and Joachim Koblev, became a trio of identical operatives called the Snow Leopards. In the midst of all of this, however, Phobos was secretly endowing himself with psionic abilities by draining mutant energy from these subjects, including some who did not survive the process. But for the next part of our tale, we must turn our attention towards Leningrad and a young woman named Dr. Tanya Belinsky. From a young age, Tanya aspired to help the people of her country. However, her father, Andrei Belinsky, was a vocal critic of the oppressive government, leading to his imprisonment in a Siberian gulag. Tanya's intelligence and drive nonetheless allowed her to become a successful and respected neurosurgeon, and while she was a firm believer in socialist ideals, the actions of her government never sat right with her. She found herself thinking of the Red Guardian, a costumed identity created by the Soviet government as a Russian counterpart to Captain America. The first to wear the costume was a heroic factory worker named Alexei Lebedev, who was also known by the alias Volodymyr Fomin, who was appointed by Stalin himself during World War II. While that original Red Guardian reportedly died in the 1950s opposing brutal experimentation being carried out by the Soviet government, his eventual successor, Alexei Shostakov, was a blindly loyal government agent who operated under the purview of the KGB and the notorious Red Room program. But for more on Shostakov and the Red Room, you can check out my video on the Black Widow, which I'll link in the description. The important thing for today is that he was publicly reported to have been killed early in the Marvel Age during a conflict involving the mighty Avengers and his estranged wife, the Black Widow herself, Natasha Romanoff. In the wake of this, Tanya Belinsky decided to co-opt the Red Guardian identity so that she could use it not as a tool of the state, but a symbol of freedom and justice for the people of Russia. Naturally athletic, she rigorously trained herself, developing an acrobatic fighting style that served her well against street-level criminals. And it was Tanya Belinsky as the Red Guardian who discovered that Professor Phobos was stealing energy from his students for his own purposes and intervened. Having already gained some level of psionic ability, Phobos overpowered the Red Guardian and escaped. He intended on going into hiding, but first he met with his primary trio of students one more time, giving each one a gift and a code name. Lanya Petrovna was given a diadem medallion that Phobos claimed would help her control her abilities and became known as Dark Star. Nikolai Krylenko was given a hammer and sickle that would help him focus his force field powers, as well as the codename Vanguard. In truth, however, these objects were devices that would allow Phobos to continue leeching their mutant energy from afar. As the eldest of the three, Mikhail Ursus was granted command over the other two, as well as the name Ursa Major. With that, Professor Phobos disappeared to continue plotting and building his strength. The Red Guardian, meanwhile, earned the ire of the authorities in her attempts to use the identity to spread more liberal ideas, and was declared an enemy of the state. In her civilian identity, Dr. Belinsky was later contacted by a former fellow neurosurgeon, Dr. Stephen Strange, who invited her to come to the United States and to perform a delicate operation on the wealthy businessman Kyle Richman, secretly the vigilante Nighthawk. His brain had been surgically removed by a mad doctor with a human head and a gorilla body. It was a whole thing, we don't have time to get into it. The important thing is that Belinsky was skilled enough to undo this procedure and restore Richmond to normal, after which she and Dr. Strange learned of each other's heroic exploits and identities during a battle with the costumed supervillain Plant Man. With Tanya wanting to spend more time in America without her overbearing handlers watching over her, Strange also used his powers to entrance Russian officials into approving an extended stay, and she continued to aid Strange and his allies as a member of his eccentric superhero team, the Defenders. Meanwhile, Professor Phobos' former students began working as superhuman operatives for the Russian government. During this time, Lanya grew close with a fellow operative, Yuri Petrovich, who became the fourth person to adopt the armor and identity of the Crimson Dynamo. Now, we may talk in more detail about the Crimson Dynamo another time, but the first incarnation of the armor was developed by the Armenian-born scientist Anton Vanko. Vanko ended up defecting to the West and allying with the American industrialist Tony Stark, but was later killed in a confrontation with a Russian agent sent to retrieve him, Boris Turganov. An updated version of the armor was then developed by Vanko's former protege, Alex Nevsky, who sought to use it for his own personal vendettas. However, this armor was confiscated by the Russian authorities, who appointed Yuri Petrovich the new Crimson Dynamo. Soon after that, Yuri as the Crimson Dynamo and Lania as Dark Star were sent on a mission to America alongside another armored agent, Boris Bulsky, the Titanium Man. They were tasked with retrieving another wayward agent, the Black Widow, Natasha Romanoff, as well as two of her allies, Alexei Brushkin and Ivan Petrovich, the latter of which was the Crimson Dynamo's own father. In this endeavor, the Russian operatives enlisted the aid of American criminals like the Griffin and battled with the Widow's superhero teammates, the Champions of Los Angeles. Meanwhile, Lania learned from Brushkin that Yuri had been lied to and manipulated by the Russian government since he was a child to mold him into a loyal servant of the state and turn him against his own father. She attempted to reveal this truth to him, but Yuri refused to listen, leading to a conflict between them, which only got worse when he attempted to strike down Brushkin. In the end, Brushkin was killed, the Titanium Man was apprehended by the Champions, and Yuri Petrovich returned to Russia empty-handed, only to be stripped of his armor and imprisoned for his failure. Lania, meanwhile, remained in the States and aided the Champions for a time, but when the members of that team went their separate ways, Lania returned to Russia to continue serving her country, and in doing so rejected the advances of her closeted teammate Bobby Drake. After that, she reunited with her brother Nikolai Krylenko, aka Vanguard, and the two were partnered with another Crimson Dynamo, Dmitry Bukharin. This trio was sent to investigate a strange signal coming from the blue area of Earth's moon, where they discovered a large ovoid device called a transporter egg, which had been placed there by aliens from the Rigel star system. During this mission, the three agents clashed with Iron Man and Jack of Hearts, who had also come to investigate, partly because of Stark's lingering animosity with the third Crimson Dynamo, Alex Nevsky. In the end, though, the Russian and American heroes joined forces to hold off an alien invasion led by the rogue Rigelian fleet commander Arcturus. After that, there was an incident in which an embittered former general named Nikolai Kutsov, who staunchly opposed a then-recent treaty with the US, tricked Darkstar, Vanguard, and the Crimson Dynamo into infiltrating the United States under false pretenses and abducting an American scientist, Professor Daniel Ironwood. Kutsov intended on forcing Ironwood to build an antimatter bomb and detonating it on American soil. However, that scheme was thwarted by the intervention of Spider-Man and the Incredible Hulk, and Ironwood was assassinated by another Russian operative, Colonel Alexei Vazin, to prevent any subsequent attempts at the same thing. While Kutsov's actions were unsanctioned, Darkstar, Vanguard, and the Crimson Dynamo had nonetheless proven themselves effective, and after being once again joined by Ursa Major, were organized into a formal team dubbed the Soviet Super Soldiers. But for the next part of our tale, we must turn our attention back to Darkstar and Vanguard's father, Sergei Krylov. Slowly dying of the same radiation poisoning that killed his wife Maria, Krylov relocated to the irradiated Siberian village Kishtum, aka the Forbidden Zone, where he built a subterranean research facility and attempted to find a cure. During this time, however, he took notice of the Red Guardian, Tanya Belinsky, and grew increasingly infatuated with her, viewing her as an ideal mate. Observing from afar, Krylov also learned of Belinsky's dual identity and sent an agent who, posing as a government operative, blackmailed her into returning to Russia. She was brought to Krylov's sprawling underground complex, and while she initially tried to fight back and escape, she was ultimately overwhelmed by sheer numbers as Krylov's servants forced her to don a mind-numbing control cowl. After that, Krylov subjected both himself and Belinsky to a series of cobalt radiation treatments, culminating in a massive nuclear blast that endowed both of them with atomic powers. Tanya Belinsky gained superhuman physiology, including strength, speed, stamina, durability, as well as the ability to fly at supersonic speeds, survive in the vacuum of space, project radioactive and concussive energy from her eyes and hands, absorb massive amounts of radiation without ill effects, and more. Sergei Krylov gained similar powers, but while Tanya's physical form remained largely as it was, it seems as though Krylov's body began to transform into radioactive energy, which allowed him to fly even faster, even approaching warp speeds, and rearrange his own molecules to shrink to microscopic levels. After his transformation, he donned a golden armored suit to contain his own deadly radiation, and became primarily known by his infamous alias, the Presence. In this state, he also possessed limited telepathic powers, as well as the ability to transform others into semi-transparent radioactive servants. Furthermore, Krylov's presence augmented Belinsky's powers, allowing her to use these abilities as well. However, the atomic explosion that catalyzed this transformation drew the attention of several defenders: Namor, Nighthawk, Hellcat, and Hulk. In the end, Hellcat helped the Red Guardian break free of Krylov's mental conditioning, and she rejected his supposed love, causing the Presence to abandon the fight and depart broken-hearted. In the wake of that conflict, the defenders were found by Russian authorities, who gave them medical treatment and allowed them to return to the West in exchange for silence in regards to Krylov's experiments. Tanya, however, was forced to stay behind and allowed herself to be taken into custody due to her body's dangerous radiation. Later, when the Presence resurfaced in the Forbidden Zone, alongside a giant amoeba that he had inadvertently created years prior, the Red Guardian was dispatched to investigate, and she ultimately helped her former captor put down this threat. After that, Tanya decided to stay in the Forbidden Zone with Krylov, as their radioactivity made them dangerous to anyone else. Russian authorities initially allowed this, but then sometime later the radioactivity within the Forbidden Zone began to expand outwards. Suspecting that Krylov was responsible, Colonel Yuri Brevlov sent the Soviet super soldiers, Darkstar, Vanguard, Ursa Major, and the Crimson Dynamo, into the Forbidden Zone to investigate, where they discovered that the true culprit was actually Professor Phobos, who sought to increase the mutant birth rate and thus create more superhumans whose energy he could potentially drain. In the ensuing battle, Darkstar and Vanguard learned that the trinkets they'd received from Phobos years prior were actually conduits that allowed him to continue leeching their power from afar, as well as their familiar connection to each other and the Presence. And in the end, they defeated their former teacher with some help from the Incredible Hulk. In the wake of this battle, the Presence and the Red Guardian absorbed the Forbidden Zone's excess radiation before departing into space, expecting never to return. Meanwhile, Darkstar vowed that while the super soldiers would continue to fight evil, they would no longer blindly trust the word of government officials. They subsequently prevented the rogue scientist Red Ghost from attacking major Russian cities with an earthquake machine, moments before being drawn into a contest of champions between the Grandmaster and Death, alongside heroes from around the globe. After that experience, the super soldiers decided to operate independently, serving the people rather than the state, with the exception of the Crimson Dynamo, who was ousted from the group and continued working as a government operative. But for the next part of our tale, we must turn our attention to another Russian agent, the Gremlin. Although his story really begins with his father, Yuri Topalov, a Russian scientist who was mutated while working on secret atomic tests for the government, increasing his intelligence but leaving him physically deformed. Becoming an intelligence operative known as the Gargoyle, the senior Topalov targeted the Hulk shortly after the monster first appeared in America. However, when the Hulk's alter ego, Bruce Banner, restored the Gargoyle to his original human form, Topalov turned against his superiors, blaming them for causing his mutation in the first place. Seeking revenge, the former Gargoyle sacrificed himself to destroy his own lab, killing the officers and soldiers within. Meanwhile, his young son, Kondraty Topalov, had inherited the same genetic mutation, causing his brain to rapidly develop, and by the time he was a teenager, he had taken his father's place, becoming known as the Gremlin. Of course, Russian authorities told the Gremlin that it was the Hulk who killed his father, leading him to swear vengeance on the Green Goliath. During this time, the Gremlin developed a weapons technology like the Soviet Super Trooper exoskeletons and the mighty Devastator armor. In one conflict, however, Topalov's Siberian complex, Bitterfrost, was destroyed by a SHIELD satellite. The Gremlin survived, but he let Russian authorities believe he was dead, using this opportunity to spy on them and learn the truth about his father's death. Furthermore, after returning to confront his superiors, he learned that there were rogue operatives in positions of government who plotted to destabilize the country. Unsure of who to trust, the Gremlin fled to the Forbidden Zone, now referred to as the Dead Zone, where he discovered an alien base hidden in the snow-swept wastes. While there, he also encountered and aided the Galadorian Space Knight Rom, who filled in the blanks by explaining that a shape-shifting alien race known as the Dire Wraiths had infiltrated Earth's governments. One such Wraith contacted the Soviet super soldiers and asked them to go after the Gremlin and destroy him. While hesitant to accept the mission, Darkstar and her allies decided to investigate the situation for themselves. At the same time, the Gremlin was bringing Rom and his American ally Starshine to the Wraith base he discovered earlier. In traditional superhero fashion, this caused a misunderstanding that resulted in a battle between the Soviet super soldiers and Rom's Space Knight, when Darkstar and her team mistakenly assumed that the Gremlin and his alien allies were preparing to attack a Russian military installation. During the battle, however, the Gremlin snuck off and infiltrated the Wraith base, while Ursa Major followed and learned the truth of the alien invaders lurking inside. Of course, in the end, the Space Knights and the Super Soldiers joined forces to oust the dire Wraiths from the Forbidden Zone. The Wraiths also unleashed reanimated prehistoric animals to fight on their behalf. However, the Gremlin proved his worth by quickly deciphering and shutting down the alien machine. In the wake of that battle, the Soviet super soldiers decided to make use of the now unoccupied alien outpost as their new headquarters, and invited the Gremlin to join their ranks. Of course, when Rom and his allies later fought a climactic final battle against the dire Wraiths, the Soviet super soldiers were among the many heroes of Earth who came to his aid, and in the end the alien menace was expunged from the planet completely. Shortly after that conflict, there was an incident in which Boris Belinsky, the Titanium Man, embarked on a plot to wreck the United States economy. As part of this scheme, he forced an expatriate scientist named Sergei Simonov to work for him by threatening his parents. In the face of this blackmail, Sergei developed a new form of armored suit that could be digitized and reduced to a compact form the size and shape of a credit card. Belinsky then manipulated a group of American war veterans, who were embittered and disillusioned by the treatment they received upon returning home, into donning these armored suits and going on a crime spree as the Green Liberation Front. This led to a battle with the alien warrior Beta Ray Bill, during which the Titanium Man himself joined the fray, his normal armor cloaked in a holographic disguise. However, when Sergei Simonov learned that he'd been tricked and that his parents were already dead, he betrayed Belinsky, exposing the GLF commander as a Russian agent and causing the armored veterans to turn against him. Overwhelmed, Belinsky attempted to escape by reducing himself and his armor to credit card form, transmitting himself back to his hideout in Brooklyn, where a descrambler was set to automatically reconstitute him in a matter of hours. Before that could happen, however, Sergei took the card containing Belinsky's digitized form from the machine and ripped it up, preventing his restoration and effectively killing him. After that, the Gremlin decided to claim the now unused Titanium Man identity for himself and built his own version of the armor, using it as a member of the Soviet super soldiers. Together, this group continued to defend and protect the people of Russia, but if you want to know what forms the team would take next, you'll just have to let me know in the comments below. In the meantime, that's all I've got for you this week, and thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, be sure to leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and to share it on your favorite social media. As always, all of the issues referenced in this video are listed in the description below if you would like to read them for yourself, as well as links to other places you can find me. Let me give a special shout out to all of my Patreon and Ko-fi supporters, Twitch subscribers, and YouTube members who help make the channel possible. By signing up for any ongoing amount on any of these platforms, you'll get your name in these special thanks here, but Patreon is the one that helps determine what topics get covered on the channel via monthly polls. And as always, if there's anything in particular that you want to hear me talk about, be sure to let me know in the comments. But that is indeed all I have for you this week, and so until next time, true believers, Excelsior!